the fear of failure that actually prevents us from doing the things. But the reality is it's actually not a fear of the failure itself. And I think this is really important for people to understand. We're not afraid of failing. We're afraid of being seen failing. Deep down, the big fear is actually not failure, it's fear of judgment and criticism.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another amazing, and guys, I gotta tell you, probably one of the best episodes that we have done to date. Guys, here we are, episode 94, and this is the Superhuman Life. As always, I am your host, Frank Rich, and guys, before we jump into today's episode, let me just remind you who we are and what we're all about here. Guys, this is the only podcast in the world that is dedicated to helping men break free from the shackles of porn addiction through the power of faith and fitness. And we do that every single week by bringing on some of the most amazing people in the world. And today is no different. We have somebody that just here in the last few weeks has become a very close, I'm going to go ahead and call him a close friend of mine. You know, we've ran and been in the same circles for quite a time, and our paths recently crossed. And, you know, we linked up and did an episode for his podcast, which will be coming out very soon. And I knew when I spoke to him the first time, I had to get this man on the show. What an incredibly jam-packed episode. Guys, we get into so much today. But today on the show, I have none other than Zander Fryer. Now, guys, it was just 5 years ago that Zander was stuck in a 9-to-5 job. He was single, lonely, bored, and lost. He was unfulfilled and unhappy. Although he was getting paid roughly, $250,000 per year. And we get into some of the stuff, but it took him losing his best friend to suicide and struggling with depression for months until he ultimately knew that something had to change. So he decided, late 20s to leave his corporate job, had no idea what he was going to do. And he only had about 3 months of living expenses. So, despite the criticism, we talked about dealing with imposter syndrome. Within the first year, he was able to replace his $250,000 salary, had his first 100K month as an entrepreneur in that first year. Now today, Zander Fryer is a best-selling author, internationally renowned speaker, and host of the iTunes top podcast, Shit You Don't Learn in College. And he's happily married to the woman of his dreams. He's been featured in Times, Forbes, Inc. He has a TEDx talk on YouTube. And his company, High Impact Coaching, has served over 50,000 people in 27 different countries. And he's worked hand in hand closely with over 1,000 entrepreneurs, helping them scale to that 6, 7, and multi-7-figure mark. He has been praised as the next generation of leaders by none other than Jack Canfield, author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. He is regarded as the coach of the coaches by some of the industry leaders, such as Craig Ballantyne, Bedros Keuilian. Guys, today, Zander and I get into his story a little bit. I shared with you kind of the 30,000-foot view there, but we talk a little bit about his mindset of going through some of these life changes. Where was he at? How was he able to stay the course to make these dramatic life changes? We talk about this concept of photo reading. Guys, you guys know I'm a big fan of books and consuming information. And this was something new to me. I'd never heard of this concept of photo reading. So we dive deep a little bit into that. We talk about dealing with imposter syndrome and shame, and how shame is the lowest level of energy that we can have in our consciousness. And how can we get out of shame? What are some practical strategies if we're dealing with guilt and shame in our life right now, which I know is obviously going to resonate with a lot of you out there. So guys, this is an amazing conversation, so much value. So bring your notes, bring your notebook, ready to take notes. But without further ado, guys, let's get into today's conversation with none other than Zander Fryer, talking about shit you don't learn in college. Hope you enjoy. Zander, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to dive in today to hear about your story, and we'll talk about your podcast and your upcoming book. And today is going to give us all an excuse to swear a little bit. So that's a nice way to kick off the show.
I'm going to cut into you. We actually just got a copy of the copies of the book. So for everybody who's listening over audio, you can't see this, but I'm showing Frank. You are literally one of the first people to see the actual book.
Dude, well, I feel incredibly honored to have that here today. So, guys, what we're going to be diving into, we talked about the education system, a few different times. Never really specifically had an entire conversation about it. But Xander's got a book that he just showed us here that is just about to be released, and it's called "Shit You Don't Learn in College." So super excited to dive into to how we got here. What was Xander's story and kind of journey that led him to being the expert on the things we don't learn in college. But I think where I want to start is let's talk about everybody's favorite establishment right here in the States right now. I know you ran into some issues with the government and getting some trademarks and whatnot. So share that story with us if you can.
That's a great place to start. Yeah, the way that the way that I start this is literally okay. Shit you don't learn in college. Everybody's like, yeah, there's a ton of shit you don't learn in college. Well, the U.S. government legitimately didn't want me to publish this book. So when I filed for my trademark for shit you don't learn in college, I actually filed with the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, and I got a 12-page rejection letter back from them, basically culminating in the fact that they said that this will never be trademarked because it is, and I quote, lewd and offensive to the idea of higher education. So here I am trying to point out that our bureaucracy is broken, and the bureaucracy shuts me down while I'm trying to do that. So we ended up. I took it to a lawyer, and he's like, "This, I believe this is actually unconstitutional." And so we ended up in a 2-year legal battle with the U.S. government. We actually took it to the Supreme Court, and we won. So it actually came back. The U.S. Supreme Court came back and ruled that what the U.S. Patent and Trade Office said, that I could not have my trademark, was actually unconstitutional, because it is freedom of speech. So our First Amendment. So we got our trademark. We fought the law, and the law did not win. And now we've got our book.
Incredible, incredible. And I wanted to start there, obviously, kind of in a humorous way, but at the same token, like I think it shows, when you believe something to be true and it's in your heart and it's a passion and this is a part of your calling and your purpose, like don't let anything prevent you from getting that out into the world. I mean, guys, just think if 2 years ago Xander would have accepted that rejection as a reason to not pursue this. He wouldn't have his top winning podcast. He wouldn't have a brand new book that is going to change thousands of lives, and he probably wouldn't have the business that he has today. So let's go back a little bit, Xander, and maybe kind of get to the point where some of this stuff started to click. So where did this kind of become a part of your life? I know you went to college, so you learned a lot from college, but when did that kind of breakthrough point where you realized like what I'd spent 4 years learning like isn't what's going to make me successful in my career and in life and in business?
It's I think there's always kind of a buildup and a burst when you're with a balloon. You build up, you blow up a balloon, and then there's a burst, right? So I think the buildup happened long, long ago when I was younger, and basically, throughout my entire life, I was slowly learning that the education system did not work very well. Right. And so I take it back to like when I was in second grade, when I was 7 years old, I was the slow kid. So I took an aptitude test and an IQ test, and basically came in like the last, like, 5% or something like that, 5 to 10%. And our teacher basically said, or the person who took the test, I should say, basically said, I'm most likely going to be held back in second grade. Right. And my mom, being the amazing, loving woman that she is, was just like, oh, he's cute. He'll get by in life anyways. We're not worried about him. It's like amazing, just pouring in the love. And you got to
Gotta
love
love
my mom for
moms.
that. Yeah. Got to love my mom for that, but not helpful. So I remember talking to my second grade teacher, Mrs. Linda LaGrange. I still remember. She passed away 5 years later from breast cancer, actually. But I remember talking to her, and she goes, Xander, do you want to be smart? And I said, yeah, I do want to be smart. And she said, well, you're going to have to work really hard at it. And so at 7 years old, she implanted this idea in my brain of the growth mindset. So Carol Dweck's book, The Mindsets, at 7 years old, she planted this idea in my brain that intelligence was not given, it was earned. right? And you could learn it and you could develop it. So I worked my ass off in second grade. I still remember that. I worked really hard in second grade. I passed second grade and I continued to work really hard through third grade, fourth grade. I passed, I passed, I passed. By the time I got to seventh grade, I was taking math at the high school. By the time I got to high school, I was taking math at the local university. And by the time that I got to UCLA for my engineering degree, I had finished all my engineering math and physics for my entire degree before I even got there, right? And that was from the slow, dumb kid in second grade. So that was one of the first situations that I really realized that the way that school was done was not proper, right? I had to learn from somewhere else that, like, oh, I could actually be smart if I wanted to be smart. Now when I got to high school, by the time I got to high school, I was really good at school. Like, I'd really gotten a knack for this shit, to the point where I actually didn't go to class, right? So I convinced my physics professor that as long as I kept getting A's, I didn't have to show up for my classes, and I would just give my homework to somebody else and he would turn them in. I remember I didn't show up for a stats class for 3 straight weeks, and the teacher thought that I had dropped the course, but I was just getting somebody else to hand in my homework. And then I went in for the midterm and got a great grade on the midterm and on the final, and I ended up passing all these classes. Looking back, I kind of took it a little bit too far. I almost didn't get to walk at graduation because I missed so many classes. But again, pointed out that, like, whatever the school system was teaching and what they were doing, it was not working out. Like, I was doing it my way and things were going better. And same thing happened when I went to UCLA. So when I went to UCLA, I learned very quickly that I was in I had to pay my way through college. So I was in Air Force ROTC. I had an engineering degree, which anybody who's been to college knows that engineering degree majors require a shit ton of work. I was also in a fraternity. So my first year there, I was pledging. My later years there, I was actually president of the fraternity. I had a part-time job, right? And I'm doing all of this stuff with a full course load and Air Force ROTC and all these other things. So I learned very quickly, like, if I'm going to do things the way that they want me to do it, it's not going to work out very well, right? So I found my own way of making shit happen, and a lot of this is just building up more and more of, like, okay, I'm learning that what the world, what the bureaucracy is telling me to do and how to do it is not the way that I do it, and it doesn't work for me, right? Now I fast forward a little bit to, I end up getting a job at Cisco, a phenomenal job. I'm paid really well in the corporate world. I spent 6 years in the corporate world, eventually to realize, okay, now I've reached the pinnacle of what everybody
Mm.
says was success. I've now spent since second grade all the way up to being a 25, 26 year old, I say man, but really more like a man child. I've gotten to this point where I'm making over $200,000 a year. I'm driving a BMW. I live in Venice Beach. I'm flying around the country, meeting with clients like Disney, Facebook. I have what everybody told me was success, and I felt empty. And at that point, after that, however many years of going through the bureaucracy, I start to realize, like, I think I've been lied to this whole fucking time.
Mm.
Right. And I'd really been having a lot of conversations with one of my best friends, AJ. And AJ was one of the smartest people I've ever met, one of the most intelligent and creative people I've ever met. Also, one of the biggest lights of inspiration you will ever meet. Right. But the school system never saw him as intelligent or creative, and he struggled through the whole process, and he never did well, and trying to find his place, ended up joining the Marines, loved the Marines for a little bit, but got out, suffered from PTSD, and eventually took his own life. Now, before AJ took his own life, him and I had been having conversations pretty regularly about, like, how messed up the system was and how it could lead someone like me to, for spending decades to get to a point of what is the quote unquote pinnacle of success and to feel
Mhm.
empty. And someone like him, who is probably worthy of more success than I've ever been worthy, driving him to the point of depression and anxiety and eventually suicide. And it was when AJ committed suicide that I was like, I have to do something about this. I have to say something about this, because the reality is, like, but like the stats, the data all show the same thing, right? It's Forbes did a study that found that 87% of all 9 to 5ers are either unhappy, disengaged, stressed, depressed, or anxious and want to leave their jobs. 87% are not fulfilled with what they do. That's insane. So people are starting to catch on to this. People are starting to become aware. Gallup did a poll, and it found that 50% of people that have college degrees now think that college degrees are unnecessary.
Mm.
They also found that 61% of people with college degrees would like to go back and either undo it or do something different, right? This whole system is so much. We ask 17-year-old kids to make a decision on what they want to do with the rest of their life. Like Frank, what were you thinking about when you were 17 years old? Was it like, did you have clarity on what you wanted to do with the rest of your life?
Of course not. No, I mean, you interviewed me last week. I mean, at 17, I was thinking about, where was I gonna buy, pot for the weekend, and who was I gonna convince to get me alcohol?
Who?
Like
Yeah. Where was I
that
going
was
to get
it.
booze? Where was I going to get my weed and that cute girl in Spanish? Right. Like
Exactly.
that's it. And we're asked to decide about our life at that point. And the reality is, we were never prepared and never set up properly to succeed to begin with. So that's my long-winded answer of this was the balloon growing and growing until it burst about four
Yeah.
and a half, 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate you sharing all that. And when a lot of this really started to click for me was right around the time we had this financial crisis in 2008
Like
and
2008, 2009. Yeah.
2009. So at that time, so I don't have a college degree. I excelled in high school because I knew how to take tests. I knew how to work the system in high school. Like I could convince teachers that I turned reports in when I didn't even do the work. Like and obviously that's probably now why I work in kind of sales and persuasion. But
So you
so I
did learn something valuable in school, is what you're telling me.
in high school I did, and then I showed up to college. I had a scholarship here to USF based upon like my grade point average and whatnot. But I showed up and like I wasn't prepared, so I did 2 semesters, and then I got into the real world, and I started having some quick financial success in sales and bringing it back to that financial crisis. So in 2007, 2008, 2009, I was working for a corporate recruiting agency. So here I was an executive in a firm. I was making, about 140 plus per year. But the positions that I was filling for were these default mortgage positions, because at this time, everybody was losing their homes. And the people that are applying for these 9, 10, 11, $12 hour jobs had master's degrees.
It's
So
insane.
here they
It's
are,
insane.
they're calling me like, can you help me make $10 an hour? And I'm bringing in $4,000 a week without a college degree. And back then it kind of clicked like, damn, I'm so glad, like whatever led me down the path to screwing up and not making it through college, I think saved me a lot of time and prepared me. And I now have, life's, experience, 20 plus years of kind of being, or almost 20 years of being in the corporate world, being in sales positions, learning and mentorship and all these things that I know you really talk about. I want to go back to kind of when you were in school, because I'm assuming that there's something about your learning style that worked, and I don't know if it clicked for you then or if you've been able to kind of go back and kind of piece together what were you doing that enabled you to retain this information, get these grades and skills. Maybe it's not going to help our listeners that are going through school, but maybe what you were doing can help them in kind of real world learning. I'm sure the same tactics can apply if you're studying a book or if you're studying something on sales or persuasion or whatnot. So was there something specific about your learning tactics and how you were consuming information?
It's interesting you bring that up. So first of all, I learn by experimentation, right? So everything, and what I'm going to explain to you right now is something that I learned back in high school and college, and now I understand psychologically what I was doing because I've actually learned the principles of it. So one of the things that I always tell people is like I was a little shit as a kid. Let's just leave it at that. All right, I'm gonna be honest. I was a little shit as a kid. I broke a lot of stuff.
I mean,
But
you're only what, 5'6" and like a $140
yeah,
soaking wet,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
you're still a little shit. It's okay.
I'm still a little shit. Yeah. And so back when I was growing up, I broke a lot of shit, but I paid attention when I learned. So I would break stuff, but I was always curious to understand. Right. And I think a lot of people never go back and reflect and try and understand why things happen the way that they understand. I just did an interview on the Playbook with David Meltzer, and he said something along the lines of like, he's like, dude, I know 60-year-old professionals with 40 years of business experience that don't have the wisdom that you have as a 33-year-old kid. And he's like, why do you think that is? And I go, it's pretty simple. Like a lot of people do stuff and they don't notice what they're doing, and then they go repeat it. It's like if your house crumbled behind you and you go try and build another house with the same crumbled bricks, you're going to end up with the same shitty house. right? So they never learn from the things that they never reflect and review the things they went through. But as a kid, I was always curious to understand why things happened the way that they did, and I would always break things, and then I would ask myself, well, why did that happen the way that it did? So I wasn't afraid to go try new things. I wasn't afraid to go break shit. But then I would always pay attention to what happened and why it happened. So one of the things that I learned, I remember basically learning how to study textbooks very well, and it was an accident. It was actually for a physics midterm because I wasn't going to physics, and I basically found out like the physics midterm was the next day. So I grabbed the physics textbook and I ran this is like a midterm, so I had to get through half this textbook, right? And now I'm not, I was never a great reader, right? So, like, if I'm going to read word for word this book, right? If I'm going to read this book word for word, it's going to take me 3 days to get through it, anyways, right? And there's no way that I'm going to remember everything. So, what did I do? I literally opened up the book and I scanned through the book for what looked the most important. And I just soaked in the most important things. Now, think about this, right? If you go read a book, whether it's a self development book or whatever it might be, if you go, like, have you ever read 4 Hour Work Week?
Yeah,
I'm assuming you have because
Or
you're an
some of
entrepreneur,
it.
right? So
yeah.
can you recite that book word for word for me?
No, of course not.
No, of course not. But I bet right now you could pick out a couple of big, topics that that book taught you, right? Like, leveraging VAs and like things like that, right? You could pick out these big topics that you still learn from it down the line. Now, most of us we will never retain 100% of a book, right? But if you can go learn some of the big topics and understand them deeply and think about them critically, you can get 80% of the way there with 20% of the work, right? So this is actually a principle that I learned recently is called photo reading. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term photo reading. It's actually what I do now. Every week I photo read a book. It's something, you've heard all the people that say, "Oh, I read a book a day and this and that." They're not sitting down for 9 hours every single day or 8 hours or whatever it takes to fully read a book, and really ingrain it. They're not sitting down for 9 hours. They're photo reading, right? Or maybe they're speed reading. But like, so Tony Robbins implements photo reading, Jack Canfield, a couple of my mentors, they all implement this process, but I can photo read an entire book in about 45 minutes, right? And essentially, what it is, it's going through the book, allowing your subconscious to absorb the book. So, most people don't realize that subconsciously, you're taking in about 98% more than what you're consciously thinking about when you look at the words. So, when I look at words on a page, all I see is like maybe 3 or 4 words at a time, and my subconscious is absorbing the entire page, right? So most of us, when we read a book, we try and learn it through this tiny little pinhole of 5 words at a time. So we read 5 words at a time. What photo reading does is you actually take in all of it, right? You're taking in all these words, you photo read, you go through the book, and then you come back and you find the big key points that stand out to you. So you're going the other way around. You go subconscious first, then to the conscious. Normal learning, you put it through the filter of the conscious. So you're learning very, very minimal amounts at a time, but your subconscious can handle so much more.
Dude.
Did I just blow your mind a little bit?
Dude, that is some shit you do not learn anywhere else other than right here on the Superhuman Life. That is a powerful, powerful tactic. And I got to assume, like, as you do this more and more and you improve your processing and you improve your own rational thinking, like, you get better at it. Because the 20% that you're not consuming, like, you have the ability, based upon understanding the 80% to a deep level, plus all this experience of processing and rational thinking, to maybe, like, if you're having a test, like, you could use a kind of a rational approach, knowing what I know, knowing kind of how things don't work, and based upon the experience that I have. Brother, that in of itself is worth millions of dollars.
You can buy that with Pareto's, 80-20 rule, right? And, what I would do in college is I wouldn't go to any of my lectures, but right before the midterm and the final, I would go to a TA session and I would see what the TA was talking about to get an idea of what the TA thought was important. Because if the TA thought it was important, that meant the teacher thought it was important, right? So now I know the major topics. Now I go back to the textbook and I only focus on learning those big things. Right. So there's tons of studies on photo reading. They've found that people who photo read can actually retain more information than people who don't photo read. So like you'd think like, oh, Zander, like if you were to photo read a textbook, it wouldn't be as well as reading it cover to cover. It's like, it's actually better because you're not filling your mind with superfluous bullshit. You're only taking the really important stuff. So your brain has more room, more RAM, if you will, capacity as a processor to handle and really deeply critically think on that stuff.
Dude, I love this. I love this so much. Let me ask your opinion, or if you've heard this. I think it's a tactic I picked up from Jim Quick a couple years ago, and I've heard Hormozy talk about it as well. He actually mentions it in his book. Consume it both audio and visual at the same time.
Yep.
Have you ever tried that? Is there any research showing? I feel that it's really helped me in the last 2+ years of doing it, because sometimes you catch yourself more paying more attention to the audio. So you're like, okay, I'm audio consuming this, and other times you're really deep into the words. But I feel when you kind of combine them both, at least for me, anecdotally, it's worked. Anything supporting that, or any experience
Yeah,
with you?
couple things for you there. So short answer is yes, it works, right? Because really what you're doing there is, again, some people would be like, well, consciously I can only pay attention to one or the other, but again, what's the purpose of this? Subconsciously, you're bombarding your subconscious with a little bit more, and you can actually do it a little bit faster because you're doing both at the same time. So you're hitting auditorially and visually. Now, the reason that I don't do this is because any book that I try to consume to obtain as much information as possible, I photo read. Very difficult to photo read and listen to an audiobook at the same time. But one of the things that you can do is, if you're listening to an audiobook, when I do, so let's say I'm at the gym, I'll turn on an audiobook to pretty much as fast as I can listen to, right? Because I'm not trying to consciously understand things. I'm trying to absorb it subconsciously, right? So you can actually absorb it. Again, if anybody's interested in photo reading, by the way, just Google photo reading. The guy that I learned it officially from is Paul Sheely. So you can check him out. Like, he was the one that taught Tony Robbins. Like, he's taught a bunch of other people. So one of the things that he talks about is, like, auditorily, you can actually consume up to about 15 to 20 times as fast, right? And you don't really realize this until you actually go do it a couple of times. And if you're just really trying to absorb it subconsciously, like, I can get through an entire audiobook in one gym session, right? And I'm not like sitting there like taking notes on it, but like I can consume the entire thing. And then when I go back to it and I'm reading the book, I've already got it all in there. Right. So both of these ways, the whole goal here is really trying to bombard your subconscious with it rather than trying to consciously understand it. Then you pull out the hooks from the subconscious to the conscious.
Yeah. Now, with photo reading, would there ever be a reason, once going through the photo reading, getting the whole book down, to go back and read it at normal speed? And if so, what would you be seeking to get out of the book at that point? Talk personally with you, or
If you want to actually enjoy the book,
okay, got
photo reading is not enjoyable.
it. Okay.
It's work, right? It's brute force. Like, when you, like, the first time you watch The Matrix and he like plugs in and he goes, "Oh, I know Kung Fu," right? It's like that, right? But it's like you watch Neo when he's getting plugged into the Matrix, and it's like, "Nyah," and he looks like stressed out as shit because he's getting all this information bombarded in his subconscious. It's not enjoyable. So if I want to enjoy a book, I read a book. If I want the information, I photo read it.
Got it. Great to know. I don't want to spend this whole time on photo reading. We'll definitely. I'll link up some stuff, guys. I'm definitely interested in experimenting this. Maybe I'll do a solo episode here in a couple months, guys, after getting a couple books behind me. But let's go back to your story, because here we had this kind of awakening point. We're in Cisco, we're meeting with high level executives, doing quarter million a year, kind of got the ideal life. But then you had this kind of aha moment. So pick us back up there. Like, what's the next move? What's the first move that Zander takes?
When I quit,
Yeah, like how do you go from corporate success story to I don't want to take up the whole time to get us to where we are today, but let's talk a little bit about that transition, because I know there's going to be a lot for our listeners. We have a large amount of audience that maybe they're kind of in this circle now, or I think there's a lot of value in kind of that transition for you.
So the real bubble burst when I decided to quit was basically, I had a mentor of mine who was an entrepreneur. And he basically just asked me, he said, "Zander, like, what would you do if you couldn't fail?" And I was like, honestly, like, because I used to be in the Air Force. I was in Air Force ROTC. I was actually going to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and I got a DUI my senior year, so I got kicked out of the Air Force. So I go, honestly, like, the one thing that I miss is like leading and mentoring other people. And he's like, and I was basically like, I got that in the Air Force. I haven't gotten it since. That's the one thing I miss. I love what I'm doing, but I haven't gotten that at Cisco. And he goes, "Well, why don't you go down that track? Why don't you figure it out?" And I go, "Well, I've got this amazing job. I'm getting paid really well. I'm getting, going to be one of the youngest directors in Cisco's recent history." I come up with all the excuses for why I'm going down this path that doesn't mean crap to me. Right. And he basically just goes, Xander, at this point, he was $1 million earner and, about a decade and a half older than I am. And he goes, Xander, just because there's a path laid out in front of you, does that mean you should follow it? And just because you're good at something, does that mean you should do it? And he goes, Xander, do you know the difference between you and me? And I was like, well, you make a shit ton more money than I do. And he goes, the difference between you and me is I'm actually living my dream. And ever since you got kicked out of the Air Force, you're just dreaming one. And when you get to my age, you'll realize that the one thing that you can never get back is your time. And every moment off purpose is a moment wasted. And here I was, this like cocky, confident kid that like I was doing all the things right. I had on the facade, I looked so good, but like he cut straight through that shit right to the core. And like he knew that I was not happy. And so he just called it out. He's like, all I see is a scared kid, which is the truth. Right. And so I remember thinking about that conversation that was like a Saturday night. I remember thinking about that conversation all Sunday. I didn't talk to a single person all Sunday. And then Monday morning rolls around and it was like, I had my like 8 a.m. call with the Disney team. And I kept thinking like, I'm never going to get that hour back. Then my 9 a.m. call with the NBC team. I'm never going to get that hour back. The 10 a.m. call with the sales team, the 11 a.m. call with the engineering team. By the time lunch rolled around, I'm like, I'm never going to get that morning back. And I literally just picked up the phone and called my manager and I was like, Frank, not you, different Frank. I was like, Frank, I'm done. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, who gave you an offer? Where are you going? And I was like, nobody gave me an offer. He's like, well, what are you doing? I was like, I don't know. He's like, what do you mean you don't know? I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that it's not this. Mm. And really that was the moment for me that I realized like, I couldn't waste time pretending that it would come to me, pretending that I would figure it out eventually. I had to put all of my energy into figuring it out first. And that was the only way that I was going to get to live a life that actually mattered to me. So I ended up giving my 2 weeks. It was actually, I think it was about 4 weeks. I gave him my 4 weeks. I quit and I put all of my energy into figuring out, quote unquote, what I wanted to do with my life. So I spent over the next 3 months, and I knew it had something to do with like mentorship or something like that, but I'd never even heard of this whole like coaching thing. Right. Little did I know I was destined to be, the cliche millennial quits corporate job to become a life coach. I spent every dollar that I had saved up because everybody's also like, Xander, you had so much money, you made so much money. I'm sure you just had stockpiles of cash saved up in your bank account. You guys, I'm a millennial. I didn't save money. That's hilarious. That's adorable. Right. So I had about 3 months worth of living expenses saved up and I spent every dime of that in the first 30 days. And then I started racking up credit card debt. Why? Because I knew like I spent $120,000 on my UCLA degree, which taught me how to do something that I didn't give a shit about. Why would I hesitate to invest in myself now that I was clearly going to go for something that really mattered? So I put myself into about $20,000 worth of debt, hiring every mentor, every program, every mastermind, everything that I could do. First to get clear on what I wanted to do. And, after getting clarity around that, it was very clear I needed to become a coach, right? I wanted to coach people. I wanted to help people and I wanted to figure out how to be paid to do it. And then I had to learn marketing and sales and copywriting and all these, all this other stuff and content. And so I invested in all these different masterminds to kind of piece together all the different combinations to the combination lock. And about 3.5 months in, I had my first 13K month as a coach, as a life coach. And the next month was 17K. The next month was 24, I think, then 32, then 40 something. Right. So, I put in all this work. I put myself into a bunch of debt. I was about 2 weeks away from not being able to pay rent. And the whole thing turned around. Right. Because I was willing to put the work in and make it happen. So we scaled it up from there. Within our first year, I had my first 100K month as a coach. And somewhere around that time, I transitioned from life coaching to coaching other coaches. So, all these coaches that I had started to network with, health coaches, fitness coaches, life coaches, career coaches, they were all like, Xander, you just did in 4 months what I've been trying to do for 4 years. Like, how the hell did you do it? So I started to coach these other coaches and I did it with a handful of them and they got amazing results. So I was like, okay, let's do it with some more. And that's where high impact coaching was born. So about 4 years ago, that's where high impact coaching was born. Now we've worked with nearly 1,000 coaches, helping them build six-figure, multiple six-figure, and seven-figure businesses. We've got about a $4 million business right now, looking to scale that to 8 figures over the next 2 years. Like you mentioned, shit you don't learn in college podcast and the shit you don't learn in college book has been a side effect of, we've worked with so many people now that we've figured out what it really takes to build a life with more money, more meaning, and more freedom outside of the 9-to-5 world.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question here because you kind of said it, jokingly about, the whole, 26-year-old, corporate executive turn life coach. For you at the time, was there any feeling of doubts or maybe, imposter syndrome? Like how am I actually going to make this work? Like nobody's going to take life advice from me. And I'll be completely honest here. Don't I know you won't take offense to this because I know you. But I see some of that stuff out there myself. I see the 22, 24-year-old kid. I'm like, who is this kid to become a life coach? That's just kind of my own, limiting beliefs I'm projecting onto somebody else. But with you, was there any imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you kind of work through that to keep the gas pedal down? And I'm asking the question because there's going to be people hearing this that maybe, they have this dream, they had this, thought of like, I want to launch this thing or I want to start this, but I'm not qualified because of insert whatever limiting belief they have about themselves. So I know that there's something real valuable here.
So the big question is like, if you're not qualified, how do you become qualified? Right? You have to do the damn thing. Right. So for me, of course there was those thoughts. Of course there was those beliefs. Like I'm not good enough. So one of my first mentors that I ever learned from was Jack Canfield. Right. He's by far one of the best coaches in the entire world. The dude is like a walking embodiment of like purpose and love and joy. And like, he's amazing. Right. And here I was, like you mentioned, this 27-year-old kid at the time, like, who am I to coach people? I'm not Jack. Right. And I compare myself to him. And of course, you're going to have all of these thoughts. And the big thing that I kind of came back to was two things. Number one, I'm not good enough yet, but I can be. Right. So this is literally one of the most important beliefs that I have had. And, after having interviewed thousands of successful entrepreneurs at this point, both formally and informally, I have found that this is a belief that every successful person has. Somewhere deep down, they are crystal clear that they are not good enough. Now, this goes against all things. This goes against all things that self-development gurus out there will tell you. You're all good enough. You're the perfect embodiment of who you need to be. No, fuck that. You are not. If you were, you would already have all of the things that you want in life. If you were, you would have more money. You would have the successful business. You would have the relationship you want. You would have all the fulfillment. You would have everything. But you're not. Now, what I want to be clear on is that doesn't mean you're not worthy. You are worthy, but you have to work at it. Right? You are worthy, but you have to learn and grow and put in the effort. Just like me when I was 7 years old. I was not good enough. I was not good enough when I was in second grade. But I could become good enough. I just had to put in the work. Right? And so the reality is, whatever your fears, whatever your imposter syndrome, it's totally fine. We all have it. I still have imposter syndrome. I've done deep psychosomatic work with billion-dollar business owners. And you know what's different about their imposter syndrome and yours and mine, Frank? Nothing.
Oh, it's way bigger. Oh, yeah.
Nothing. It's the same shit. It's exactly the same. That's what's mind-blowing, right? We all have that. The only difference is that person who's a billion-dollar business owner has learned to turn down the noise of that voice and be like, oh, that's cute. I call it the little bitch voice in my head, right? Oh, that's cute, little bitch Zander. Like, I appreciate your concerns, but you're not calling the shots today, right? So I want you to understand the truth is you're not good enough right now. But you can be, right? Which brings me to my next point, which is I can literally guarantee your success right now. Okay. I want you to think about whatever goal that you want to achieve, right? If you think about that goal, now I want you to consider that every single one of us has the ability to learn and grow and develop as a person, as a salesperson, as a business person, as a husband, as a wife, as a, whatever. We all have the ability to learn and grow. Now, if you always focus on growing every day, focus on growing and getting better, and you don't quit, what's the only outcome? Success.
Success.
That's it, right? If you're constantly getting better and you don't quit, there's only one outcome. Now, I'm not promising you a timeline, right? But I can promise you, if you always focus on growing and you do not quit, you will eventually get there. Now, if you focus on growing faster and you make faster, you make faster mistakes and bigger mistakes and you learn from them quicker, you'll get there quicker. But regardless of that, if you focus on growth and you focus on never quitting, there's only one outcome. And so when I quit and when I started, there were all these fears, but the two beliefs I had was number one, I'm not good enough, but you damn well better bet that I'm going to become good enough. Right? And number two, if I don't quit and I focus on growing, at some point I'm going to get there. That's it. That's all I needed was enough to just get me moving. Because the reality is no success will ever come to you unless you're willing to get moving. You're never going to become successful by reading books. You're never going to become successful by just listening to this podcast. Though what I will say is you guys should listen to this podcast more because it's going to program your brain and inspire you and motivate you to get your ass moving. Right? But you will never get there just by listening to this podcast or reading Zander's book. You have to act. You have to move.
Yeah, this is something we've talked about dozens of times here on this podcast is being addicted to consuming personal growth information.
Yeah.
And doing nothing with it.
It does feel really good.
Exactly. But then you don't do anything, and then you look back in a year, and the income is the same. You're still in the dead end job. The relationship still sucks, and you're like, this stuff doesn't work. And it's like, no, you didn't do the work. I'm sure you're familiar with Pressfield's work, right? The War of Art. He talks of resistance. So I had him on the show months back, and what you're saying, that kind of imposter syndrome. He shared with me, like, he was working on a book, and he's like, Frank, I sit down every morning and I just stare at a blank page and I can't get through it. And here's somebody that's written, dozens of best-selling,
the best books in the world. Yeah,
exactly. And, he's like, what's your resistance right now? And you shared it. I mean, for me, like, I have this belief that, like, I'm never going to become an amazing podcaster. I mean, we're having tremendous success. Numbers are going up. Actually, we had our biggest single day downloads yesterday. But there's this part every single day when I stand here, or every single week when I stand here to record, there's this part of me that almost hopes the guest doesn't show up. And it's like an excuse not to record but I deal with this stuff. So anybody that's out there that's dealing with this, like, you're hearing it from Zander, you're hearing it from myself, Steven shared it. We all deal with this, but what maybe separates us from you guys is we know that this is our path to success. Success is just failing less often. And that's it. This is amazing, man.
So I would one thing that I would add to that too, right, is like, it really helps for people to understand why they're afraid of failure, right? Because like we've all heard like, oh, like failure is the bigger killer of dreams than, like, what is it? Fear of failure kills more dreams than the failures themselves. That's what it is, right? So it's the fear of failure that actually prevents us from doing the things. But the reality is it's actually not a fear of the failure itself. And I think this is really important for people to understand. We're not afraid of failing. We're afraid of being seen failing. Deep down, the big fear is actually not failure. It's fear of judgment and criticism, right? So this is a deep-rooted evolutionarily programmed fear, right? And I'll explain why. So the fear of judgment and criticism that's closely tied to failure creates a feeling of shame. Now, shame in the body is, so according to Dr. David R. Hawkins, who wrote Power versus Force, shame in the body is the lowest energetic state that a human can feel, just above death. Literally.
Wait, say that again?
So shame is the lowest energetic state that a human can feel just above death. Death is literally, the worst that a human can feel, because feeling is dead. You're done, right? Shame is just above it. This is why, if you think about it, obviously I've done a lot of digging into suicide after losing my buddy. Shame is one of the biggest causes of suicide. People actually fear shame more than death itself. Now, the reason for this, if you think of evolutionary man, right? Let's say, Frank, you and I are in a small tribe of 50 people or something like that. And let's say that I do something that causes me to be socially judged and outcast. I bring shame on the tribe. I get outcast. Well, if I get outcast from our 100 or 50 person tribe, I'm going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I'm not going to survive that shit, right? So shame is actually really closely related to dying for us as humans, right? Now, I don't know about you, but have you checked the bathroom recently? There's no saber-toothed tigers, right? Like if we get outcast from one community, we can actually go find friends and community in another, right? So that fear of judgment and that fear of criticism no longer holds the same bearing in today's society, but it still triggers a response in us like we are about to die. So really most of us are afraid of being judged and criticized more than death itself. And that's why so many of us don't even try. We don't even put ourselves out there. Don't push past just like you mentioned, like we got to go out there and we just got to go fail a bunch to learn more.
Yeah.
Well, to the normal mind, if you haven't really understood this, Xander might be saying like, you're basically telling me, your subconscious is going, Xander, you're basically telling me I got to go die a bunch before I can finally live, right? I'm not going to do that. Like, screw you, right? So once you understand, like, you're not going to die, then you can start to allow yourself to be criticized and judged. We're all going to be criticized and judged, right? I would rather be criticized and judged doing something that I love than being criticized and judged doing something that I hate. That's the only thing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. One thing that's been game changing for me is I even shot an entire video about this. I want to stay on the shame a little bit, due to I think the work that I do. Obviously, there's a lot of value here for the guys, and I think for me, one of the game changers for me is when I realized, like, for one, I've struggled with a lot of depression. I've struggled with a lot of doubt, very dark moments in my life, and there's been a lot of internal conversations. And what I realized is the shit that I've said about myself upstairs, there's nothing that anybody is ever going to say that's going to compare
So
to
much
that.
worse.
So much worse. And I got to live with myself for the rest of my life. So staying on this shame topic, just because I know that there's going to be a lot here for the men. What are some, whether they're habits daily, whether they're tactics, strategies, if we've identified that we're living in this, state of shame consciousness, that we can begin to lift ourselves out of it?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is understand this will be really helpful for a lot of the guys out there. Understand that all the thoughts you think, not all of them, most of them, and I'll run through a quick study with you guys. Majority of the thoughts that you think are out of habit. They're not the conscious thinking you. I mean, you and I have had this conversation, but 95% of your brain is subconscious. 95%. Cornell University did a study and found that 95% of your thoughts, so there's 60,000 thoughts that we think in a day on average as humans, 60,000. 95% of them are a repeat from the day before. 19 out of 20 thoughts are a repeat from the day before, and 85% of those thoughts are negative based on worry or self-sabotage. 85%, okay? So I'm going to take it a little bit further for you guys, right? So on top of that, the 85% of worries, they did the study and they found that of the 85% of worries and these negative thoughts, right? They found that 85% of the 85% of negative thoughts and worries never came true. Only 15% of the negative thoughts and worries ever came true. And of the 15% that ever came true, 79% weren't anywhere near as bad as we made them out to be in our head, or they were actually positive and necessary. Now, if you're doing the math in your head or you brought out a calculator while I was running through this, basically that means that 97% of the worries and negative thoughts that we have in our head are complete bullshit. 29 out of 30 are complete bullshit. But our brain has this way of playing the same sad song over and over in our head. Why? To keep us safe. Right? Our subconscious was designed to keep us safe. It was designed to prevent us from running out into a dangerous area and being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Right? So it wants to keep you safe. It wants to keep you here. It wants to keep you comfortable. It wants to keep you alive. Right? But the problem is it's creating stress and anxiety at a totally new rate. Now, Frank, let me ask you this question. Would you believe that your future is dictated by who you are? Like
Absolutely.
the person you are creates your future, right?
Yes, the person
Yeah.
I'm becoming. Yeah.
Good point. The person you are, the person you're becoming dictates your future. Okay. Now, for most of us as humans, as men, who we are has been dictated by our past experiences and our traumas and the lives we've lived, all the things that are programming this 95% of our brain. So I want you to think about this. Transitive property. I was a physics nerd, right? So transitive property, who we are creates our future. But where we've come from creates who we are. Therefore, our past creates our future if we let it. If we don't step in and intervene and start to change who we are as a person, think differently, act differently, become aware of the negative thoughts, become aware of the feelings of shame and guilt. It's okay to have them. We just need to realize that we are not these feelings, we are not these thoughts, and we need to start to work on changing them. Right. So, when I tell this to people, it's like the first step is you need to become aware. When you feel this shame, when you feel this guilt, right? Don't don't pretend it's not happening, bottle it up and shove it back down, right? Because when you turn off that conscious part of it, let's say you're feeling guilty, right? If you're feeling guilty or ashamed, you go, "Oh, I don't want to feel ashamed. That sucks." Right? So the 5% of your brain that's conscious turns it off. Where does it go? Down into the 95%, which actually dictates a majority of your future.
Yeah, and then it reemerges tomorrow as another thought. And it reemerges
tomorrow because we didn't deal with it, and then it's going to reemerge the next day and the next day and the next day, because our brain has a way of replaying the same sad song if we do not deal with it, right? So the first thing that I would say for any of the men out there, any of the guys that are feeling shame or guilt, the first thing that you need to do is you need to embrace it, and you need to forgive yourself. Because it's your past programming that created this program, it's not you. When I lost AJ, when he committed suicide, I was a coach who had helped people through PTSD, through suicidal tendencies and depression. And I couldn't help my fucking best friend. On my watch, my best friend killed himself. Can you imagine the shame and the guilt that created for me? I felt heartache and loss for losing a brother that I had known since I was 8 years old. I felt guilt because I couldn't help my best friend. And then I felt ashamed for feeling guilty. And then I felt resentment for him taking his life and taking himself away from me and his family and making me feel this way. And then I felt guilty for feeling resentment to a dead man. I felt all the feelings. I was in a deep, dark depression for about 9 months, somewhere between 8 and 9 months. And what got me through it was realizing that depression was not me. I had emotions, I had feelings of shame, and I had feelings of guilt, and I had feelings of resentment. I had gone through serious trauma, and I had to allow myself to feel through that stuff. Emotions don't go anywhere unless you move through them. The word emotion, emote in Latin, e to eject, mote to move through. You must sit in your emotions. You must feel through them. You must forgive yourself for feeling such shitty emotions. If you feel shame about something you're doing, forgive yourself. Allow yourself to feel the shame and realize that you are not a shameful person. You're just feeling ashamed because you did an action that you don't think is something that you should do. So you need to allow yourself to feel ashamed and then make a decision to change the action moving forward, right? But the only way that you're going to reprogram the subconscious is by allowing yourself to move through the crap first.
Yeah, this is so incredible. I mean, you're not your past, you're not your decisions, you're not your actions. And if you guys are out there and you're like, none of them. We had Dr. Caroline Leaf and both Dave Ramsey. I mean, two of the most brilliant people when it comes to reprogramming the neuroplasticity of the brain and whatnot. And both of them talked about the science of forgiveness. So this is all backed through clinical research. I definitely recommend, if you guys haven't, go listen to the Asprey episode. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, and also the Caroline Leaf, because it's right in line with what Zander is saying here. How much of this reprogramming, would you say is a balancing act of, because what it sounds like is there's a therapeutic component. So it's kind of unpacking the past and getting to the root cause of it. And then there's kind of the work that you and I do, more of a coaching kind of forward projection. So, how much of this is like what's a percentage of, how much time is spent on the past and then how much time is spent on the future?
I think, so what I would say is, one thing that I would say is actually the reason that we've been so successful in our coaching business is because we spend so much time in the past. Right. So you could be the best coach in the world and you can help drive someone forward. But if they're carrying a backpack of 100 pounds of weights, not going to do shit. Right. Like you could be the best driving force in the world. We spend so much time, literally, when we work with coaches, the first thing that we have to do is we literally have to completely reprogram them. We have to go straight to the ground floor and completely reprogram their subconscious minds from the very root base of it, because you could give all the best tactics and strategies to someone, but if they have all these weights hanging off their back, it's going to take them forever to get there. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to get rid of the emotional baggage. Right. So we do a lot of deep psychosomatic work. We take people, one of the exercises that I love teaching people is something called fear journaling. This is something that anybody can do on a daily basis. Like when we do our deep psychosomatic work, you have to have a trained practitioner that digs in and does this stuff. But something that anybody can do, I call fear journaling. Right. So when I lost AJ, I did this every single morning for those 9 months that I told you about. Right. I literally grabbed a journal and I wrote down all the negative shit that I could possibly think of. I went so deep and dark that literally I tell people today, if they found my notebooks, I'd probably go to jail. Right. It was some fucked up stuff. But like what I was doing is I was getting, like I just mentioned, the more emotionally you can get out of your body, out of your head. If you've ever read the book Body Keeps Score or Goodbye Hurt and Pain by Dr. Deb Sandela, it talks about this. We retain these emotions in our body and in our subconscious if we do not allow ourselves to move through them. So every morning when I woke up, I would literally bawl my eyes out, cry for about 30 minutes while I was journaling the most negative shit that I could think of, until I had this cathartic moment of like my well being completely emptied. Right. And that allowed me to get through my day. Now, after losing your best friend, that well was filled up the next morning. So I would have to do it again the next morning. And there were some times when I would have to do it the morning of and the night before going to sleep. Right. But as I did this over the course of 5-6 months, I'd be pulling out, all of this emotion. Right. And eventually the well starts to dry up faster. And then I only have to do it every couple of days. And then I only had to do it once a week because I'm getting all of the emotion out of me. Right. So literally, like anybody can do this right now. If you're feeling anxious or frustrated or stuck or negative or ashamed, this goes against everything that, the law of attraction and all this different stuff tells you to do. Right. Because, why don't people do this? Well, first of all, it sucks to feel afraid and ashamed and guilty. Right. And then also we go, oh, Zander, I believe in the law of attraction. What you focus on, you'll bring more of into your world, right? Cool. Well, like we talked about, turn off the 5% of the conscious and that shame goes down to your subconscious 95%. You're still feeling it. You haven't
Probably
dealt with
attracting it even stronger.
You're attracting it even stronger because you're letting it pile up. This is the main reason that the law of attraction doesn't actually work for most people, is because they turn off the subconscious to it. They say, oh, I don't want to think about that, because then I'm going to attract more shitty things into my life. Well, it's buried in your subconscious now. So you might as well go sit in it for 5 minutes, bawl your eyes out like a 12-year-old kid. And then, like, have you ever seen a kid fall and scrape their knee? Right. If they try and hold back tears, they're like for like 30 minutes. And you're like, oh my God, just cry. Just let it out. Please just you're driving me insane. Right. This is how most men walk around in today's society. Just a big smile on their face, but half crying. Right. All you got to do, that 12-year-old kid, after they fall and scrape their knee, they bawl their eyes out for 30 seconds. And then they're jumping off their walls and laughing and playing again. You just have to get it out. Maybe it's screaming. Maybe it's yelling. I have clients of mine that just take their phone and they yell into their phone. Like they literally go into their closet and yell in their phone for 15 minutes to just get it all out. Right. And you just have to get it out because otherwise it's buried in your subconscious. So you do this every day and you will get all of the emotional crap out of your body and you can start to make rational, logical decisions again.
Zander, this might be one of my favorite episodes ever, bro.
That's what I was shooting for, man. That's what I always shoot for.
I mean, I come into every single one of these with a goal of like, I want to hear something shared with me that I haven't heard shared anywhere else. And I feel like 50 minutes of this conversation, and I spent, 6+ hours, studying you and reviewing, getting ready for today. I feel we covered stuff that maybe you've shared it elsewhere, but I didn't find any of it.
Yeah, some of it.
Today, yeah. So this has been absolutely amazing. We didn't even get to like what is actually broken about the education system. How is it set up? I wanted to get into Socrates and whatnot. So we may have to have you back on for round 2, but I know we're coming up on the,
back, man.
I know we're coming up on a hard
just at the
stop
beginning.
here. Yeah, so we have one last question we end every single episode with, but before we do that, there's going to be a lot of people that want to, maybe check out the book, learn more about you, maybe some of your coaching. Where's the best place for people to connect with you? Where are you hanging out online? And yeah, kind of, 60-second elevator pitch on what you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. For the book, we do have, you can check out the book on pre-sale right now at sydlicbook.com, SYDLIC book.com, stands for shit you don't learn in college book. We're giving away about $3,000 worth of training and programs when you get the copy of the book. So a lot of what we're talking about, you want to go further in depth than that, we're giving that away in our free trainings. Also have the shit you don't learn in college podcast. We're dropping a lot of this knowledge, a lot of these exercises in the podcast as well. So you can check me out on the podcast. If you're a coach and you're looking to grow your coaching business, like I mentioned, we've helped nearly 1,000 coaches build multiple six-figure and seven-figure businesses. And like we talked about, a big part of that is we literally have to reprogram them as multiple six-figure and seven-figure earners before we give them the tactics and strategies. But you can learn more about that at zanderfryer.com, ZANDERFRYER.com. And check me out on Instagram as well, Zander Fryer. Feel free to follow me, shoot me a message.
Yeah, and there's going to be a fire episode coming out probably shortly after this one is released on the Shit You Don't Learn in College podcast.
Yep.
Zander
You got to
interviewed
pick
me.
out Frank.
Yeah, so as we bring it home here, obviously the title of the podcast is The Superhuman Life. We got here kind of a result of my own story and transformation, what we kind of talked about on your show. But when I talk about living a superhuman life, for me, Zander, it's more of a belief system. It's more kind of the way that I approach life and what I feel is the best way for me to show up daily. So I believe we're all created for a very specific purpose. And then it's our job, our responsibility to kind of manage this vessel. So there's a physical side of things, and then do everything we can to kind of bring that purpose to life in service of others. So that's kind of my definition of living a superhuman life. So as we bring it home here, Zander, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Oh, that's a great question. I've found, and this is kind of what I've learned. Living a superhuman life to me kind of results in two things. So number one, living your true purpose, like you mentioned. I think that's incredibly important. I think like you mentioned, everybody has a purpose. Learning how to find it, live it. It's actually not necessarily an outcome. I like to tell people it's a decision we make in every day, right? We decide purposeful or we decide fearful, right? And it's a decision we make constantly. So living purposefully, right? Number one. And then number two, enjoying the process, enjoying the ride. And I think there's this beautiful dichotomy that they seem like polar opposites. Like you've got to be working and striving for a bigger mission, or you've got to be enjoying life, right? I think that's what true mastery to me, what a real superhuman life would be, is this mastery of these seemingly dichotomous, like separate things of really enjoying, having a great time, having a blast, being present, appreciative, grateful, and pushing your ass real hard to make sure that you accomplish all the things that you were really meant to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's growth mindset defined. I mean, enjoying and understanding that it's the process where the growth and change happens. So guys, this has been amazing. Go check out Zander. We got all his info drop down there in the show notes. Check out the book, podcast dropping soon. But for Zander Fryer, Frank Rich, guys, we love you so much. Make sure to subscribe, leave us a review. We'll see you next week.